This lesson is going to be about running Five9 reports through WFA. And we do that via the Five9 VCC connection. So if we go in here and we click plus on the lower right, click on Five9 report, you'll see we have the ability to set up a report stream to be run on a regular cadence if that's what you need. So you would, we're not going to fill this out yet because we need to create the report, but I'm just going to show you, you name the stream. This is how often you want to run it, the folder name in Five9 VCC reporting, and the report name that you call it. And then you have generate row events, which you can either say yes or no. So if you say yes, that means you want to trigger an event for each line of the report. So if there's 10 lines in the report, you will see 10 reactions being triggered once the report gets ran. If you say no, it's going to compile that in a CSV file, which you can then process typically through an ETL processor if you need to do anything with that. And then the window type is cumulative or rolling. So think of it cumulative like cumulative day, which would be midnight to the current time that it ran. And then rolling, so rolling day would be the last 24 hours, whatever, from this time to 24 hours prior to that would be the rolling value. And then for the day, you also have the window range here for day. You can say minute, last 10 minutes, 30 minutes, week, month, year. All those options are available there. So delay at run, it's an optional setting. I have not used it, but you do have an option to delay at run. Okay, so before we set this up, we are going to go into reports, and then we need to create a report first. So understand that this is running the API, the run report API. So the report that you create needs to be available for the user that's designated for the VCC connection. So do not put a custom, if you're using a custom report, do not put that in a private folder that the API user that's designated for WFA does not have access to. You can, if you have the credentials, log in as the WFA user and create a private folder in there for them. And then that way it's protected. So you could do that if you didn't want anyone to be able to even see the reports that WFA is running. You just got to make sure you have the credentials for that user as well to be able to log in and do that. Otherwise, what I typically see done if you're going to build something custom is to create it maybe a shared report that say WFA reports do not delete, something like that. Or when you create the report, make some sort of WFA designation for it that says, you know, have a designation on there, say use for WFA, do not delete, things like that. So people will not try to edit that at all. So we're going to go ahead and create a custom report so you can see how that's done. Actually, let me make sure before I get started. Okay, shared reports. Okay, create new custom report. And let's just do a call log. And just so you can show how you can customize this, you can just do the standard call log if that works for you. One thing I would say is include as much information as you need and only the information you need. However, you can also add some key pieces. So let's say, for instance, all you need is maybe a timestamp or something like that. You can also include like call ID, campaign, session ID, things, different data in there that you think you may need for reference. So if you ever need to look through the logs and know whether something got processed properly, you may need a bit more information than what you actually need, the reaction needs to run. But this allows you to then search through the logs to say, maybe you only needed the phone number for the reaction, but if you need to look through the logs and things, it might be best practice to throw in like the session ID or call ID in order to track down, like if you had to troubleshoot, like why did it not get processed a certain way and you need to find that one when it ran, if you have values in there like session ID and things, you may be able to more easily track that information down. So we're going to say timestamp millisecond. I'm just going to throw some random stuff in here, call ID, session ID, and Annie Dinas campaign, and let's just say disposition. And we're going to save this report. Now, understand, want to make one thing very clear. When you're running this, because like I said, it's running the API in the background. So when you are scheduling this, the schedule and things, sorry, the time frame that you're putting in here does not matter. I want to be very clear on that. It does not matter what you put in here. I can save it here just like this. The timestamps and things, the intervals and things are only relevant to when you're running the report through the UI. When you are calling the API to do this, it is using, let me get back to, it is using this cumulative day. It is doing the timestamp with the window type and the window range. This here does not matter to it. So you can't go in, and there are things you can do, which we'll highlight here, to fine tune this report to just the values you need. But understand that this time range is irrelevant to WFA because it'll use its own time range when it makes the API call to run this. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to save this, and it's going to be in the shared reports, and let's call it WFA. Something like that. We'll save this report. And what I would tell you is if you need to fine tune this to certain campaigns, call ID ranges, date ranges, if you go like cumulative month or rolling month or something, but really you only need a certain day, use these advanced filters for that because the API call will honor these filters that you have in here. So if you need, if the ranges that are built into WFA do not work for you, you can leverage something like this to just say date equals 2025-01-28. So at the time of this recording, this would be yesterday. If you want it to just be that, then go in and save it this way with this filter in there. And the other thing to point out is that it will honor these times, and you can go in and you can adjust it. So if you do a run, you can adjust these values and it will honor those values for the save. So this report gets saved, and don't think you can't go back in and make updates, add columns. That's all you need to do. If you need to make changes to the report to say, I need to add more columns, I need to adjust the filter, you do that through the UI and it will honor it in WFA because WFA just calls the API for run report at that time. So it's just going out and saying, run this report that you have saved in this folder for this time frame, and that's it. So understand that you can make changes to this, but you don't need to make the changes in WFA. You make them in the UI as far as adding columns. Now, inverse of that is if you're going to remove columns, you need to verify that in WFA you are not using any of those columns for anything because that will break that. You may come up with things that say like missing data or something like that. So make sure that if you are deleting columns from this report, that you are going through WFA and verifying the reactions that you're not using that information in any way. Otherwise, you can just add freely as needed. But again, best practice is to keep it to just the things that are relevant to what you're trying to do. Because the more data, the bigger the files that get delivered to WFA, the longer things might take. So if you have a bunch of needless columns in there, there's a chance that things could slow down a little bit. Now it had to be probably a lot of data for it to slow down, but it's there, that could happen. So just when you build these reports, if you don't need like 10 columns from that, just make a custom report and delete those 10 columns from it so you're not wasting resources on those particular values. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and save this. We already did, but I'm gonna just save it again because that's how I am. So we need to go in here and we're gonna call this demo. This is just the stream name, understand. We'll leave this expression alone for the time being. One of the things I'd say is this is set, I believe this is default every 30 minutes. this would run. Be mindful of API limits. So in its current form here, it's like I said, it's using the run report API. So just understand that all of the API limits apply to this. So reports can be one that's pretty restrictive on how often you can run this, especially on a per minute, per hour basis. So you can work to get those raised, but best practice, just make sure you're not running it too much so you run into API limits for that. So we're just going to leave this alone for now. The other thing I would say, there's not necessarily like a run on demand option in here. So what I typically do is if you want something that, because you have to have it on in order to run it. So if it's something that you want to leave on and be able to run ad hoc, put in some sort of expression that is way off into the future is usually what I do. So I might have one that's not scheduled to run until the year 2050 or something like that. So you can put something like that in. That way you can leave it on and then run it as needed because that time frame will probably never run in our lifetime, possibly. So um, just you can leave this the way it is, put an error expression, and you can just leave it and it'll just run however often you need it to. Otherwise, if you need it on demand, you can put a exaggerated expression in here to have that. So um, okay, so folder name is going to be shared. I always forget there. Let me just make sure that it's shared reports. Okay, shared reports. And we'll get the name. And then we're going to say no, because I want the CSV. And we're going to say, let's say rolling, let's go month. Okay, so this is going to get from this time right now to a month ago. We'll go ahead and create that. And that's going to create a stream on the end. Find that. And then once you're ready, because remember, it is on a schedule. So once you turn it on, it's going to start running on that schedule. So in this case, I will turn this on. We got to give it a little bit of time to be turned on. While we're waiting for that, let's go ahead and build a simple reaction so you can see how this will work. Okay, so again, we're doing the CSV version of this. Okay, we're going to save that. Okay, so for this, the when is an event. There's actual Five9 report event that's for there. And then there's two things you can, I think you can pretty much ignore the file saved, but complete, so that's your CSV one. So when the CSV is done and it's completed, then this is the event you want. If you're doing the record by record one, then you do record. For this one, we're doing complete. And all we're gonna do for now is we're going to use an ETL. And first thing we got to do is create a bucket for this. We don't need to adjust anything in there. I'm not going to get deep into the ETL part. If you want to see anything on that, there are separate ETL lessons to look at all the options here. So we're just going to say add all because this is going to be an array of data. I'm going to reference the instance ID for the bucket we just created. Generate ID. So if you ever need to update values that are in there, say yes, so that when you map it, you can update values in there. And then for data, we're just going to say, oh, actually, let me rewind that back. We need to do, actually, we are going to do action, ETL processor, and CSV import in this case. And then it wants a URL. So we reference the URL from complete because it stores it on a local temporary file. We're going to leave the format alone. You can adjust the delimiter for the file. So if you're bringing in a file in a different, so if you like pipe delimiter or something, you can do that. And then generate ID if you need to possibly do any updates. The best practice is to use the doc ID for that. We're not going to do anything with that here. So we're going to say CSV import. And then I'm going to do a filter on this just so we can see the values. So you can see what this looks like. So let's do instance ID, filter name, doesn't matter. In this case, expression, we'll just say session ID. Just give me everything, and we're not going to generate events. We're going to finish, and then we'll do a shutdown to clean it up, because that's all we're going to do for this demo. We're not going to do anything with the data for this demo. I'm just trying to show you how this data comes in and what it looks like, and then you can choose how to process that information. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn this on, and then let's go back. Let's see the status of this. I'm going to search for report. Okay, it is online. I'm going to go in here, and if you ever need to run this on demand, understand it does say that. I'm going to refresh this page just so you can see. It does show on. Sometimes it'll show off. If you're not sure, go ahead and refresh the page, and that should show that there. So I'm going to go ahead and say run, execute. I'm going to pause the video and allow that all to happen, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the data. Okay, so we're back from that. I did discover, if anyone saw in there, I did leave that filter in there. So I did have to go in and remove that because I was coming back actually with no rows. So I now have that fixed. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at this reaction activity here. And we'll just say this day. So you can see a few different runs in here. This last one is the one I want to show you once I fix that. A new bucket and then import. So we had 4 records, and then I'm doing the filter so that you can see we have 4 records, and I want you to see how this is formatted. So this puts all of the different rows into an array, and you'll see that all the parameters are capitalized in here. So timestamp, session ID, they're all as you see in the report. So the report headers, whatever you see in the report to reference those values, they are whatever you see in the report headers themselves. So if you have a custom one that you're using in there, you do need to map it exactly how that looks. You can do a test run here to just get an idea of what it looks like, but when you then run it in here, so let's just say I needed to reference campaign from this first one. We're gonna assume we went through like a map and it's line by line at that point. But let's say this is one that I need to reference that. I would go CSV, actually we would go values 0 dot campaign. So I just want you to understand that you use this exactly like the headers that you see. So if you're going through a map, it might look a little bit differently. You might just use campaign data and document in there. But I just want you to see that the main thing I want you to get is how the headers look, how the parameters look as they come through on this CSV report, so you know how to reference it. So that's a CSV one. So you can bring that data through, run it through an ETL if you want. Otherwise, you can also do something like a CSV export or something. That way, sometimes, WFA has like SFTP functionality and things like that that you can use. But the main thing is, a lot of times I see it either with validation, or if you need to do something with historical data that maybe, at the time you didn't have it built in WFA, but you need to go back and rerun something, you can use a report like this. So I am going to go in, I do want to show each record one here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn this off, and just because sometimes when you make a change, um, maybe WFA doesn't get, like when you save it, if you feel like it didn't take that change, I tend to turn it off for a few minutes just to make sure that the old stuff is all cleared out. That's only if you end up having a problem with anything. Now I'm going to change this to yes. I'm going to save that. I'm going to pause the video to let this run, or basically let this off for a few minutes, and then we'll come back through and look at the results here. Okay, so we triggered that to run, and I created this simple reaction here. So we change, I'll show you these steps that I went through here. Sorry, Five9 reports, and we use record instead. So we'll have a, in the logs, we'll have a record for each one of these. So in our case, we had 4 records, so you'll see 4 entries in the logs for this because it goes through individually. And then I just threw something in here so that we could show how I reference it. I'm just using a mustache template saying fill in this with session ID. So you see session ID here, and you'll see data. So we're going to use data, session ID, and then just a finish in there. So you see the 4 entries here for when it ran. And if we look at each one, you see data. So that looks the same as before, but it's individualized. This is one record at a time. And last, an index is passed, and you'll also see the render mustache. You can see how the template session ID, we use session ID and then reference the session ID that came through in this. So pretty straightforward there. It's really user choice on what you need, but I am going to highlight one difference between using a CSV and using the by record one. So I'm going to go back into the report that we built for this. And what I'm going to do here is I want to find, let's find some fields. Just want to find some fields that possibly would not have some values in it. So hopefully I get this right on the first time here. Okay, so one of the things that if this runs as I expect, I'm going to save this. Okay, and the thing I want to note here is hold time and holds, because you see that there's dashes in here. So I'm going to go ahead and test this. I'll pause this because it's going to take a little bit for it to run and then populate the logs and things. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go back into stream. Search for report. Tell it to run again. And then we'll give it some time to do that. Okay, so that ran and you see 4 new runs in here. And what I want to highlight is when you look in this report and see values, columns that do not have values, we're going to look at that. And if you go into record and data, you don't see those values passed in. All you see agent, so you can see that it was added. We added agent. That did have a value. So that comes through, but you see the holds and that did not. So one of the very key differences that I want to point out between using a CSV version of this and a record by record version of running this Five9 report is that if on the each record one, if it does not contain a value, it gets stripped out of this and it only passes ones that have data in there. So you need to take this approach with this is like either you make sure that you're only referencing columns that you know will have values like session ID, campaign, Dina Annie, those should all have values in them. I believe so. Like Annie and Dina, maybe there's times that maybe it doesn't. But you know, obviously session ID is going to be one. So if you only need the session ID from it, using the row version of this could work perfectly fine. However, I will go back into this reaction. And if you want to use it this way, but you need to verify if that is in fact there. So this was hold time, let's say. We're going to go, say we need to take a path here, record, data, hold time is set. So whether it's there or not. So this will just determine whether it's actually there as a parameter or not. Otherwise, you can also, inside of these filters, if you want to just do an action, you can also do an action just based on hold time is set. So you can use the filter version of this too. If you just want to get, instead of having an if path, you can just go right into, different actions and then have a filter in there to check for that. So that's how you get around that. If you need to use this version, you might want to just check to see whether that value is set or not, and might have to go down different paths based on that possibly, but that's a choice you need to weigh there, because the CSV version should deliver all the headers, and even if the value is blank, that should all be there as well. So just something to know as you work through this.